Usually, when we talk about things being political, we tend to mean the sort of stuff that Meg and Alan have been talking about already. Politicians who form governments and make decisions on our behalf. But politics is about people like you and me as well. And I've been asked to talk about how we can participate in the political process. Now, obviously, one way we could do it is to become politicians and take the decisions ourselves. And it's every now and again, it's worth reminding ourselves that politicians are people too. But if I assume that not many of us want that sort of career path, we need to talk about other ways of getting involved. Now, the most obvious way is by voting and voting in elections. At the last general election, about 67% of the people who were allowed to vote turned out and did so. And then, of course, apart from elections, we've got referendums. I assume you remember referendums. One of the interesting things about referendums is they're relatively novel in our system, and so there are still loads of questions about them that we've got to ask, like, should they be binding? Is 50% plus one vote enough to make major decisions that might affect us for decades to come? Now, whatever your answers to these questions, the fact is that voting is the only way most of us get directly involved in politics. In fact, many people think politics starts and stops simply with voting, but they're wrong. There are loads of other ways in which we, the public, can engage with politicians, engage with politics and try and influence them. One is by writing to your MP. Now, MPs get loads of letters, so you've got to wonder whether they're going to reply properly to all of them. On the other hand, one tactic that people use is to try and get loads of people to bombard MPs with letters about a particular topic in the hope that it alerts them to the fact that there are strong public feelings about that issue. And about a third of people say, we don't know whether they do, they'd be willing to go and meet their MP or send an email to them if they felt strongly enough about something. Now, bear in mind, at the start of last century, some MPs never went to their constituencies at all. Now, nearly all MPs think it's important to be present. They're sensitive to criticisms of being absentee. This at least makes them more accessible to us, their constituents. More and more people are also signing online petitions. More and more people, I should say, are also bragging about the fact on Facebook, which I personally find a bit annoying, but that's just me. But over 6 million people, so about 10% of the population, signed a petition on Brexit a few years ago. And 50,000 people signed a petition saying Jeremy Clarkson should be Prime Minister. Yep, you heard that right. Now, this is engagement, however fleeting, with politics. And remember, UK Parliament petitions may get time to be debated in the House of Commons if they reach 100,000 signatures. Though I have to say, I think that the sort of petition websites we see now, like change.org or 38 degrees, could undermine the value of petitions simply because they generate so many. And then there are more traditional people who don't mind spending their evenings and their weekends making banners to get ready for demonstrations to make their voices heard the old-fashioned way. These are the people who sit in the middle of the road and block the traffic, or who shout outside Parliament. Now, this is obviously active engagement, but only about 15% of us say we'd consider going to a demonstration, a picket, or going on a march. And there is a debate to be had about what an acceptable protest is. What level of disruption do you think it's reasonable for demonstrators to cause? And then there's that small minority who go even further and pay their hard-earned cash to join a political party. Around 1.5% of us are members of the Labour Party or the Conservatives or even the monster raving loonies. Now, the first thing to say is the role of members is different in different parties. Labour members have more say over policies than Tory members. But even then, there are members and members. Most members have a direct debit of a few quid a month that they've basically forgotten about. Very, very few, even members of parties, are active. Fewer than 1% deliver leaflets or knock on doors. In fact, party membership is declining significantly, and this means that we, the voters, tend to be less loyal to parties than we once were. And it's one reason, incidentally, why elections are so much more unpredictable than they were. 49% of us changed the party we voted for between 2010 and 2017, which is unheard of. Now, all these numbers tell part of the story, but only part, because there's far much more to politics than all this. So here's a question. Is helping out at your local food bank a political activity? Because 40,000 people did it last year. I bet many of them don't think that they're being political, but they are. They're engaging in activities interacting with both the state and society. But you've got to ask yourself, is it right that well-meaning individuals should do this rather than the state itself? And finally, of course, how could we forget there are citizens' assemblies like this one that we convene to address tricky issues. In the UK, we've used them across a range of issues: social care, the future of Scotland, congestion and public transport. The Scottish and Northern Irish governments say they'll hold at least one assembly a year to try and discuss difficult issues. And there's interest in Westminster in them as a way of involving us, the public, more directly. Now, I think you people are as well placed as anyone to say whether you think this is a good idea or not. So these are all the ways in which we, the public, can engage with and influence politics. But there's influence and there's influence. And when it comes to influence, we're not all equal. With the ballot box, each of us, in principle at least, has an equal say. But that's not so true outside of election time. There's money. Rupert Murdoch has huge power via his media empire, including The Sun and The Times. Prime ministers woo him and try and get the support of his papers. And money's also an issue for the parties themselves. The vast majority of Tory party donations come from individuals. Yet during the 2019 election campaign, 93% of Labour's donations came from trade unions. Now, this does raise big questions because it's hard to ignore the advice of a big donor. But should we try and limit donations? Should we regulate how much influence donors have? And if you're answering yes to those questions, do you have the faintest clue how we would do that? And of course, it's not just money, it's profile too. Think about Marcus Rashford. You can't deny that he's had massive influence over politics, but should he be able to? And look into your hearts and try and figure out whether your answer depends on whether you agree with what he's saying or not. So it's not as simple as saying follow the money. There are all sorts of ways some people manage to make their voices heard more effectively than others. It can even be a case of personal connections. I mean, again, politicians are human, and like all humans, they tend to trust the people they know. But should you have the ear of the Prime Minister because you shared a room with her at university, or because you went to the same school as her? You may want to consider in the weekends to come whether you're comfortable with this kind of influence. And again, if you're not comfortable, what on earth could be done to control it? So there you go. I've given you loads of questions and no answers. Sorry about that.